Hello, my name is Bob and I'm a tutor at Raritan Valley Community College's Academic Support Center. This is session 4 on GeoGebra and this is module 6 and we're going to talk about sliders. In this module we're going to use variables to define constants. We're going to learn how to turn a variable into a slider. We're going to look at some examples, particularly the general form of a linear equation, ax plus by equals c, and the slope-intercept form of a linear equation, y equals mx plus b. Then we're going to learn how to adjust a slider. That is, we're going to be able to change its range, we're going to be able to change its increments, and change its lengths. And finally, we're going to take a look at how we can use a slider to move a point along a curve. So let's get started. And the first thing we need to do is launch GeoGebra. So we're going to double click on GeoGebra and it will come up. And we're doing our web launch here. And to make this view a little bit easier, I'm going to go up to Options. I'm going to go down to Font Size. I'm going to take us up to 18 points, and you can see this made our numbers along the axis a little bit clearer and a little bit bigger, so we'll use that as a way to help us see what's going on. Now suppose we wanted to graph ax plus by equals c, and we wanted a to be 2 and b to be 1 and c to be 0. Well, one way we could do that is type in a equals 1, capital B equals 2, capital C equals 0, and then we could type in the equation capital A space x space plus capital B space y space equals C. And when we type that, you can see that in our dependent objects, the equation of the line has been placed in there, and it's replaced A, B, and C with the values that we assigned to A, B, and C. Well, what would be nice is if we could change those values of A, B, and C pretty easily. And the way we do that is with sliders. So we're going to go up to Free Object A and do a right click on it. And we're going to go down to where it says Show Object, and we're going to do a left click on Show Object. And you can see this little bar popped up with the A. And that's called a slider. If we're in the point mode, which we are, and we put our arrow right on that dot, we can move that A back and forth, and you can see what happens to the line as we change the values of A. We'll now go down to B and do a right click on it, and click a left click on Show Object, and there's the slider for B. Then we'll go down to C and do a right click on it, and a left click on Show Object, and there's the slider for C. And so we can see what happens as we adjust the different values of A, B, and C for this line. Notice as I move C back and forth, the line moves up and down. As I move B back and forth, it pivots around the point on the x-axis. And as I move A back and forth, it pivots around the point on the y-axis. It kind of makes the whole picture come alive. Now let's try some more neat stuff that we can do with this. Suppose we wanted to have the slope of that line. Well, I'm going down to my input line. I'm going to type the word slope. And you can see it filled it out. And between those square brackets, this line was called small a, so I'm going to put a small a in there. And hit enter. And you can see there's the slope of this line. Notice that as I move B, you can see the slope of the line changing. If I take B all the way down to 0, oops, I'm sorry. I can't go that far. If I take A down to 0, you can see the slope goes to 0, and if I take A negative, the slope goes positive. If I take B down to 0, notice that the slope disappeared, and there it comes back on. So there are the things that we can do with these dynamic sliders. In addition to showing the slope, we could also show the x and y intercepts. What we would do is type intersect. Alright, and right between those square brackets, we want to see the intersection of line A with the x-axis. And remember, there's a keyword for x-axis. We can type small x, capital A, X, I, S, no spaces in there. Hit enter, and you can see this point is assigned to the x-intercept. If we do a right click on the point and go down to Properties, where we have Show Label, we're going to put down both the name and the value. And we'll hit Close, and you can see that the name and the value are shown. We can also hit the intersect point for the y-axis. We can do that with the intersect tool. I'm going to go up here to the point tool, click on A, intersect two objects, and I'm going to intersect this line. I'll do a left click on it, and the y-axis, and do a left click on that, and you can see that point E was assigned to the y-intercept. Now I want to go back in and change and put the point name and value for point E. Before I do that, I have to click on the arrow, the move tool, so that when I click on E, it doesn't generate a new point. I'll do a right click on E, go down to properties, and we're going to ask it to show both the name and the value. Now notice, as I move my sliders, C changes both the X and Y intercept, B changes the slope, and A changes the slope. So there's an awful lot we can do with sliders for just this one equation. Let's try our traditional y equals mx plus b equation. Let's go to a new file. So we'll go to File, and we're going to go to New, which will ask us if we want to save the current file. I'm going to say no, and we'll just get a new file here. And now I'm going to put in y equals mx plus b. And I hit enter, and I get an error message. And it says mx is not defined. Well, remember, variables can't just be letters, they can be names. And so it's assuming that because we have the mx together, that's the name of a variable. Only because there's a space in there can it tell that m is a separate variable from x. So let's click OK here and go in and put a space between mx, and we'll hit enter again. And we get another error. And this says that the variable m is undefined. In GeoGebra, if you want to use a letter for a constant, you must put a value to that constant before you use it. So we're going to have to assign a value to both m and b before we can put in a y equals mx plus b formula. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to delete what I have in this input line, and I'm going to put m equals 1, and you can see that goes up as a free object. I'm going to put b equals 0, enter, and that goes up as a free object. And now I can put in y equals m. I need a space between the m and the x, plus b. And now if I hit enter, there's our line. To put our slider out, I do a right click on b, go down to show object, and there's a slider for b. I do a right click on m, hit show object, and there's our slider for m. By moving m back and forth, you can see that what we're doing is changing the slope of the line. By moving b back and forth, you can see what we're doing is changing the y-intercept. Now, these sliders have some properties. So let's do a right click on this first slider b, and we're going down to properties. And you can see that the slider is named b, and it's got a value right now. But if we go to the slider tab, you can see that the slider goes from -5 to +5 in increments of 10. We could change that and have it go from -10 to +10, and we'll leave the increments in increments of tenths. We'll hit close, and now when I grab that slider, I can go all the way to -10 to +10. But remember, we said our increments were tenths. I can hit 9, 8.4, 8.2, but I can't get 8.3. Well, because the line that the slider is on is only so long, it's impossible for it to get the definition needed to get all those points. In order to get 8.3 in there, we need to make that slider line longer, and we can do that. We're going to do a right click on the slider, go down to the properties, and see where it says width 100? We're going to make our width 200. Now when I hit close, notice that slider is twice as long, and now I can get individual values as I move across there. I can also go in there and do a right click on that slider, go down to properties, and if I only wanted integers, I could make my increments 1. I'll hit close. It didn't change it for the one that's set, but once I move, now it's only going to show me integers as I go through that various y-intercept line. Now let's do one more thing that we can do with sliders, and that's let's show you how to move a point along a curve. So I'm going to get another new window. I'm going to hit File, New. I don't want to save this current file. And let's put in the equation for a parabola. And I'm going to do it in f of x format. So I'm going to type f of x equals x. And I'm going to go down here to our little icons and go for the squared icon. Okay? Hit enter, and there's our parabola. Now let's see if we can get a point to move along our parabola. Well, in math, sometimes we call those points x sub 1 and y sub 1. Let's try and do that here. I'm going to define x sub 1 equal to 0. And notice that the way I typed sub 1 is x underscore 1, but the way it shows up here under free axis is x sub 1. And now I'm going to define y underscore 1 for y sub 1 equals, and I want f of x sub 1. And notice again that I typed x sub 1 is x underscore 1. When I hit enter, you can see that y1 came up as a dependent object. It depends on what x0 is. X1 is. Let's change that x1 into a slider. We're going to go up to x1, do a right click on it, left click on show object, and now as I move this point back and forth, you can see that y1 changes with x1. Well, that's kind of neat, but what we'd like to see is a point move along it. Remember, our points are defined with capital letters. Let's define point P as being equal to, parentheses, x underscore 1, comma, y underscore 1, closing parentheses, hit the enter key, and now there's our point P. I can grab my slider, and now notice as I move my slider left and right, that point moves right along the parabola. So let's review what we saw in this section. We learned how to use variables to define constants. And then we learned how to right-click on that variable to turn that constant into a slider. We looked at the examples of linear equations, both the general form and the slope-intercept form. We learned how to adjust a slider to change its range, to change its increments, and to change its length. And we learned how to move a point along a curve with a slider. This concludes our session on sliders.